Hi guys, hello, it's Ola from Cool Mentors IT, and for today I have prepared I think quite an interesting topic because it's about the differences between var, let and const. So you have probably wondered, why am I insisting on using var everywhere in my code?
Why would you do that?
It's just the way it is. For the newbies, for the complete beginners, we use vars because there are differences between var, let and const. And so since var was the first variable, and the other ones were introduced only later on, and even though var is an obsolete concept and you probably will never use it in your code unless you are hired to work working on the old project with an obsolete code. But nevertheless, we all expected to know all of them and be able to use them consciously. So var is introduced first, even though it's the least important. There might be situations when you will be expected to know them. And so to not confuse too much new students, we only work on var, and only later on, when we are familiar with the concepts of scope and hoisting, only then we introduce let and const. So that's why. I know you've heard a few times, do not use var, and that's true, do not use var. After today, you are not allowed to use var. Well, only after if you get this job and you are maintaining some old code, then obviously you have to. But otherwise, other than that, do not use var. And why? We will find out in just a sec. So we've got 3 ways to declare variables in JS as of 2015, when the ECMAScript introduced the new standards, because up until then we only had a variable declared with the keyword var. And since then, we also have let and a const. Let stands for let, and I will paste the link underneath the tutorial if you are really interested in the history of why let and not any other word. And the const stands for constant because that variable is not actually it doesn't vary a lot. It's pretty constant, so it doesn't change. And more on the topic later on. All 3 have different properties, so they can all store. It's not dependent on the value they store, because they can store any value. There's no difference. You can store a simple primitive data type or the reference data type like object, but the difference is dependent on the choice of the keyword. So var will behave differently, const will behave differently, and let will also behave differently. So today's class is all about that, so you can choose consciously, so you know what you're actually aiming at in your code, and so it does exactly what you expect it to do, rather than hope for the best, because once you copy pasted something and it worked. So if you learn it well, it's it will pay off in your future. Yeah, as I said, 3 keywords, but they all variables, just different keywords. The first key aspect of why it's important to know how they differ between each other is the scope. So it's been mentioned before, we talked about scope, and so we have a var on one hand, which has a function scope, and it doesn't include block scope. And on the other hand, we have a let and a const, and these have respect for the block scope. So wherever there are curly braces, including functions, then they will have this local scope. variables created with the keyword var have no regards to the curly braces. If it's not a function, it doesn't matter to them.
I don't care.
And I've got this like great example. Shouldn't have shown you the answers. So I've created three variables using 3 different keywords, var, let, and const, and I named them appropriately. So these are at the top of our script, meaning they should be in our global scope, available everywhere. Whereas here, maybe not a very common thing in the code, but these are still like, these curly braces will introduce the block scope. Here again, I've created 3 variables, variable A, let B, and the const C. Inside still here in the curly braces, I'm trying to console log all 3 variables, and outside the curly braces, when the block scope is finished, I'm console logging whatever variables will be available. So let's see what happens. I will save this code, I will refresh this. So we've got a variable A, local scope, let B, local scope, and a local scope of const C. So all these were console logged first, and all these were printed out to the screen. Then I've got my hyphens here, which like indicate there is the second part of the code. And here I've got variable A, again local scope, and let B, global scope, const C, global scope. So these 2, B and C, were taken from the top here. Let B and const C were taken from the global scope because these are not available outside the block scope. But console log A printed out variable A local scope, meaning it took that variable from here. So we now know that when there is a block scope and it's inside the curly braces, that let B in this one, let B in here, these are 2 completely different variables. Const C has its own life, and this const C is a different entity, so to speak. Whereas variable A, created with the keyword var, has no regards to the block scope. So it has no regards to those curly braces here, and it has been declared here once, and then replaced by that variable A on here. So it's like that variable A, global scope, lived its very short life, and then has been replaced by that second variable A. Whereas these and these are 2 different entities. These, they live in the global scope, and these 2 live in the block scope, so they are local to its environment. If I try console logging A on here, so before the second variable A has been declared, it should print out global scope, and that's what's printing because it's taking the value of A from here before that variable A here has been replaced. Okay?
Yep.
The next aspect, the differences between our variables, is redeclaration. So var, if you put in your console var A equals 10 and after that line you put var A equals 20, there will be no error. It's completely fine for the program for that variable to be replaced. Whereas if you put let A equals 10 and then let A equals 20, that will throw an error. And the same for the const. So we do that, const b or const d equals 12, we get undefined, because that's when the program is taking it into its memory. Okay, I got it, I've got const d and it's storing a value of 12. If I now want to do const d and I change my mind, now I want d to store a value of 30, we have an error. It's got uncaught syntax error. Identifier d has already been declared. So the program will stop you here. It's impossible to have two of the same const. That const is constant. It doesn't change. You cannot redeclare. If you do the same thing with a var dd equals blah, it's okay, dd equals blah, and then I do dd equals, I changed my mind, I now want dd to store a value of Ola. Again, no problem, no error. I'm checking, yeah, we just changed the value. There's no problem, no error. I would show you that the same thing happens with the let, but there has been some sort of improvement introduced to the Chrome with the version 80, and it's no longer possible. Let will also not throw an error. So in the console, it's for the developers who complained that it's slowing down the process, because you know you have, it's DevTools, so you check many things, but if you do the same thing in your code inside the script in a different environment than the console and the Chrome, it would throw an error. So you can't redeclare let. You can only redeclare var. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Since it has become as an improvement that we cannot redeclare let and const, it's probably for the best. So it's to avoid any sort of chaos. Hoisting. So again, topic that has been discussed, and hence we couldn't introduce the differences between different kinds of variables, because if you don't understand what a hoisting is, then how could you understand the differences between them? So a variable created with a keyword var is no problem, works as discussed in the previous tutorial. The value is no value, but the variable is hoisted to the top of the code or the scope. Details are important. So the same thing does not happen for a let and const. So there's this so-called temporal dead zone, and the hoisting wouldn't work there. Again, hoisting is not like a totally key aspect of knowing programming, but it's something worth knowing. And it's probably for the best that they remove that hoisting thing, or they introduce the temporal dead zone, even though hoisting works, but you can't refer to a let or a const that is created later on in the code, so that you pay attention and it's like avoiding chaos in your program. I'm just gonna remove this. So if I try console logging a, and I create a variable a that would hold a value of atomic. So if I save this now, we're gonna refresh. It's console logging undefined. So what happened here? We talked about this, but as a mini reminder, what hoisting does for us, as far as var is concerned, it would take that variable a, paste it on here, like visually, the declaration of that variable a here, and then the code would happen as per usual, so const log a, and the value, the assignment of value happens just underneath. So at this point, and I'm trying to const log a, the program knows that the variable a exists, but it doesn't have its value. So saving, the result should be exactly the same. Checking connection, live preview is cancelled because the browser navigated to a page that is not part of the current project. That is not great. I will try to resolve this in just a second. What? File, live preview. Okay. And we're back. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Things tend to happen, and the most important is that we don't lose our cool. There's no problem that we couldn't solve. It's just don't ever panic.
Everybody stay calm. What's the procedure, everyone?
So, and refresh. So the result is exactly the same and defined. So underneath, the code looks like this after the hoisting happens. But in real life, the code still looks like this. If, however, I put a let instead of a var here, I saved it and I refresh the page, we've got an uncaught reference error because it cannot access a before we initialize that let. So it's still in this temporal dead zone where it just doesn't exist. So hoisting is another difference between how the variables work in regards to hoisting, or how hoisting works in regards to those variables. I think it's more correct to say property of a global object. So as far as variable created with a keyword var is concerned, it would create a property of the global object, which does not happen for a let and a const. So if in my code I put var, I'll start with the let, const a equals 3 or 1, const let b equals 2, and the variable c equals 3. I would save it. So if you remember from previous class, there is a global object, and for the browser is a window. So if I now refresh this and I try to access its window, and I will click on the arrow here showing all the properties of the window object, go alert, the top blur. We don't have A or B, but we have a C. So whenever we create, whatever we create using a keyword var, it would add another property to our window object. So again, it's like if that's exactly what you intend to do, add that property to a window object, that's fine. Then go ahead and use var. But if this isn't your goal, you don't need it, then avoid it. That's probably one of the reasons why let and const were introduced, to avoid chaos, to avoid doing things that we're not meant to do. So let versus const. Reassignment. As I mentioned before, const is sort of constant variable. So it's a variable, but it's pretty constant. So we cannot declare our const a, give it a value of 10, and then change our mind, and now I decided that I actually want to give a value of 20. It will throw an error because for our program, this is a constant value. This const a already has a value, and it won't accept a new value. For let and for var, it's slightly different, and these two are quite similar in this case because we could give it a new value. You can reassign let or a var with a new value. If I do const blah equals blah, and now I want blah to equal, I want it to equal 20. Assignment to constant variable, so there's a type error. It would just throw an error, and it won't allow you to do it even if you try. If I do let blah equals 10, blah already exists. Maybe let's do a different blah and give it a value of 10, and then I will try giving it a new value of 23. It would happily accept the new value, and the same for a var. So const constant let would accept the change. Now the interesting part, does const preserve the value? Does const protect the variable? So what do I actually mean with those two questions? Does const preserve the value since it's so constant and it doesn't change? Yes, it does preserve the value, but only for a primitive data type. When it comes to the reference data type, aka object, it would not preserve the value. Does const protect the variable? So in a way we could say that it does protect that variable. So what does it actually mean to preserve the value or to protect the variable? If I've got this const a equals John, and I try giving it a new value, so as shown just a second ago, I'll give it Jigu, but that's a real word, and I'll try console logging it. Save, refresh. We've got the same error, assignment to constant variable. So in a way we could say that the const protects the variable, and it kind of preserves the value, but only for the primitive data type, because, and so we erase that because we don't need for the program to throw an error. Let's see. Now it's fine because we only have one const a declared. But if I do const and I'll put an array or array1, okay, and I'll declare the so this, you might not be familiar yet with the concept of the array. If the square brackets, they indicate that this is going to be an object and this is an array, and it can store multiple values. So let's say I'll put a number 1, 2, 3, another one, I'll put Pat, and if I try console logging array 1, it would give me like in the brackets it's got 2 because it's got 2 elements and those 2 elements. Or it can explore further, clicking on the array arrow, and you've got 0, 1, whatever the element is. If I try the array 1, and this means that I'm either trying to access an element in our array, or if I put a number 2, for instance. So we start counting from 0 in programming. Because this is an element 0 and this is an element 1. So if I do this, array 1, then square brackets, and then 2 inside, meaning that I want to create another element that would be after 0, 1, 2. There's going to be the third element, and that's the indicator of the number. And I'll give it a value of try. Save it and refresh. As you can see, even though technically you are not allowed to change the value, because for the primitive data type, yes, it does preserve the value, but for the object, it does not exactly preserve the value, because you can add another element to this array. So you could add another one and another one and another one, and it would change what it looks like. So it does change. Declaration without initialization. Well, you can't declare const without a value, because let and var, they both get automatically assigned a value of undefined if you don't give it a value. But if const a would give automatically assign a value of undefined, that undefined would stick with it forever, because we cannot reassign a new value. So if you try declaring a const without the value, it will throw an error right away, because the program is like so wise. They know. The program knows. Well, they know. That's not on purpose. You cannot declare const a because it would get a value of undefined, and we don't want to have a value of undefined for the rest of its days. So when do we use const? When do we use let? And when do we use var? It's very simple. Always use const. Unless you already know, you have a vision for the program, and you know that its value will be reassigned. Or if you know that you are using a for loop, you know that one const and one value will not suffice. And in that case, you will need to use second most important, a let, because let lets you assign a new value. If you can't use both const or a let, then use var, but it's only as a last resort. So from now on, we say goodbye var, and we can only use let and const. I'm just gonna very quickly go back to the scope, because I've got quite a few more examples that I skipped. So if I do this, I'll just paste my code. I've created a function that is a var test. Inside that function, I've created a variable a. I gave it a value of global. Then I've got an if statement. This if statement is a fake one because I already I put the condition, I set it to true. So there is no real condition because it's always gonna pass the condition. Inside that if statement, I've got a variable a with a new value of local. I'm trying to console log a inside here, and after the curly braces again, I'm trying to console log a. After the whole thing, the function doesn't do anything on its own. It's just the declaration of a function. We need to execute the function for all those things inside the function to happen. So I will save this code, I will refresh it, and what's printed into the screen, go a local and a local twice. So meaning, again, that variable a existed, but at this point, when we asked the console to log a value of a, it's been already replaced with that new variable a. So it's got local, and that's the final value of that variable a. So we've got twice local taken from here. That variable a with a sort of global scope. Well, I named it global, but it shouldn't be global anyway, but it should be above it, but because var has no regards to the block scope, it's just it replaced that variable with a new variable rather than treat them as two separate entities. So what should happen if I do another test? And feel free to take a second here and just do your guessing. So I've got now a new function. I'm testing a let. I gave let that value of global here, and then a condition if true, let a equals local console log a, console log a. Save it, refresh, and we have now two different values. Go local and global, and it's because that we executed this function let test. So our program went inside that function, is reading, oh, we've got let a equals global, interesting, but still not asked to do anything. The next thing it says, oh, if true, okay, that's true, so I'm going inside that if statement and I will do whatever I'm supposed to do, whatever is inside the curly braces. Oh, the program says let a equals local, and then that first instruction that it receives is a console log of a. It would take the value of a from here and printing out local to the screen. So that's the first a we are getting printed to the screen. And then the curly braces are finished. So the if statement came to an end, and the next instruction, the program says console log a. It will look for an a. This a is invisible because it's in the local scope. It has its own environment. It's inside the curly braces, so it has respect for it because it has like its block scope. But this one is available, so it would console log this value from here this time. I've got a local and then global. I've got yet another test for you guys. I've got another function, and here we are testing a const. So it's pretty much the same thing. And again, guys, what do you think should happen here? How should const work here? Is this gonna be one variable and that's gonna be totally different separate variable? Or is it gonna behave differently to a let? Let's save it, let's refresh. Got exactly the same thing happening that we've experienced before with a let. So block scope that const A exists only within the curly braces, and the console log from here will find the value of a local, whereas leaving the curly braces, it will find another const with the value of global, because again, these two are two separate entities. It's always good to have like loads of examples, because once you may think, okay, I get it, it's simple, it's easy, because it is quite simple and easy, but it's kind of like messing with your head. So if I have that function var test, but I put another var on here, what's going to be printed and in what order? So let's see what happens in that code. I've got a variable a, and it's in the global scope, and it's called first var. Then I've got a function var test where I declared another variable a, and it's called second var. Then I've got an if statement where again we have another variable a, console log. I'm executing this, all this happens, and then I'm console logging a. So let's refresh. We've got a third var, and at the end first var. So var test, executing the function, going inside that function here. I'm finding a variable a with the value of second var. I'm going further. So there is an if statement. Again, we now know that var has no respect for the curly braces. So it doesn't exist only in its own local scope of the block scope, because the block scope, as far as var is concerned, doesn't exist. So this var here is replaced with this one here. It does, however, have respect for the curly braces indicating the function. So when I try console logging a on the line 24, it would go and it would look for a variable a declared in the global scope, and we have that variable declared at the top here on the line 12. And so it's finding one variable a declared in the global scope, and it has access to it because it cannot access anything that is inside the curly braces. If you remember the analogy to our house, where inside the house we can go out and get anything we want from the outside, but the outside world cannot go inside. So when I try to console log the value of a, it cannot take it from here, it would take it from there. This console log here is taking the value of third var. So basically it's not even like a third variable here, because this and this is the same one and the same variable. It's been replaced. And well, I think this is the last example, and I hope you guys will enjoy it enormously. So now instead of a var, I've got a const. Any idea what should happen here? What will happen? Got const test. So I'm executing the function. I'm going inside the function. I'm accepting that there is a const a with the value of a second const. Then I'm finding an if statement. Again, that condition here already set to true. So I'm going inside the curly braces, finding a third constant. Console log a will take the value of const a from its local block scope. So this is the local environment for that console log, and it will print out the value of third const. The curly braces are finishing here. meaning that console log A from here will not be able to go inside here because const has respect for the curly braces. So this is like me home inside that bigger home that is signified by the function. So that console log A will find the value of the second const from here. We leave the second pair of curly braces, meaning that now we're on line 24 and we are outside of any scope. We're in the global scope. Console log A now is finding first const, one that was created in the global space, and that's the one that is going to be printed out to the screen. And this is it. So from now on, goodbye var, unless you are expected to use var, but I don't think it should happen anytime soon. You are now like on your own, you understand the differences, and now you can't say I don't know anything about var or let or const. So you guys, whatever happens, it's gonna be your own mistake, and you have to take responsibility for it because you now become more and more aware of what you're actually doing with your code.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Thank you and good luck.